Hello and welcome back to part 3 of our unit on Reconstruction. Take a moment to recall our last 2 lessons. We learned that Reconstruction was a time of rebuilding, both physical and metaphorical, for our country. The United States had just fought a war amongst itself on the issue of slavery, and the North came away victorious. But in the aftermath of any war, there is a lot of destruction that needs to be repaired. And with a civil war, the people have to come back together to rebuild relationships and policy. As you move through this lesson, your focus should be on taking notes that answer these 2 essential questions. Who were the radical Republicans, and what brought about the ultimate end of Reconstruction? At the end, there will be an opportunity to reflect and review before moving on. So let's dive right in. After the Civil War, there were some Republicans who felt as Lincoln did, and they wanted to unify the country as quickly as possible. Their focus was on forgiveness. However, many in the North had much stronger views on the matter. Radical Republicans were not inclined to forgiveness. Radical Republicans in Congress felt Lincoln and Johnson's plans were too lenient and that the South should be punished. They believed that Southerners were traitors to the country. The goal of radical Republicans was achieving full equality for freedmen, and nothing less would suffice. And in order to understand how radical Republicans became so powerful early on, we have to take a look at President Andrew Johnson and the South. Johnson took over office after Lincoln's assassination, and he was even more lenient than his predecessor. He grew up a poor farmer in Tennessee, and so when he took over Reconstruction, he wanted to support poor white farmers from the South. He didn't much care what happened with freedmen now that slavery was outlawed. In what is known as presidential Reconstruction, Johnson allowed Southern states to rejoin the Union by simply writing new constitutions which outlawed slavery as was required by the 13th Amendment and swearing loyalty to the Union. He also redistributed Southern land that had been confiscated from white owners after the Civil War and given to freedmen. As a direct result of his leniency and his refusal to require states to adopt the 14th Amendment, Southern states began enacting black codes, which were designed to control the movement and freedom of African Americans. This is where we meet the radical Republicans. Northerners, infuriated by what was happening in the South, supported the sentiments of the radical Republicans in Congress. Congress refused to seat Democrats elected in Southern states during this time, giving Republicans greater control. In the time immediately after the war, Republicans held the majority in Congress. They passed the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, which were intended to help protect African Americans in the South. President Johnson vetoed these acts, but the Republican Congress was so outraged by this that for the first time in history, they overrode his veto by passing the laws with a 2/3 majority. These acts divided the Southern states that hadn't rejoined the Union into military districts, which were overseen by the U.S. Army. The Army had the power to run elections in the South and register voters in order to ensure that African American men were afforded the right to vote. The acts also required states to amend their constitutions to include universal adult male suffrage, which is the right to vote, as well as the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship to all who were born in the U.S. Over time, due to President Johnson's leniency and the resentment of white Southern Democrats, Republicans slowly lost control of the South, and this came to a head in the election of 1876. Rutherford Hayes would become president, but not because he carried the popular vote. Hayes was a Republican, but he was not as extreme in his beliefs as his congressional counterparts. In fact, Hayes, a former Ohio governor, wanted to end radical Reconstruction. His opponent, Tilden, actually carried the popular vote, but it was vital to Republicans that they maintain the presidency. And that's how we got the Compromise of 1877. This compromise was reached between the 2 major political parties. In exchange for recognizing Rutherford B. Hayes as the winner, Democrats demanded the following. 1. A Southerner be appointed to his cabinet. 2. Federal spending on rebuilding the South. 3. removing military occupation of the South. And this was the biggest. This concession meant the end of Reconstruction. Reconstruction ended in 1877 as a direct result of the compromise. Federal troops were removed from the remaining Southern states still under Reconstruction governments, and Southern white Democrats took control. The rights that African Americans had just recently gained through Reconstruction were lost through what became known as Jim Crow laws. Among other laws to restrict their freedoms, beginning in 1890, every Southern state wrote new constitutions to prevent African Americans from voting. These laws would skirt federal laws by creating additional requirements to vote that affected African American men at a significantly higher rate than white men. All right, let's take a moment to review your notes. Make sure that you can answer the following questions. 1. Who were the radical Republicans? And 2. What brought about the end of Reconstruction?